Ladies and gentlemen, dear members and colleagues, on behalf of the Franco-German Office for the Energy Transition, I wish you a good morning. My name is Sven Rösner and I will present today's webinar on options and business models for onshore wind projects once feed-in tariffs end. On behalf of our team, I wish you a happy and healthy new year, and we hope that you and your families are well. Thank you very much for having registered and tuned in today for our first webinar in 2021, during which we will try to provide you with a comparison of the situation in Germany and France for operators of wind farms once the support ends, and the strategic choices that can be made at that stage. While this has been a reality in France for some years now, where wind parks connected to the grid before 2016 benefited from a support with a duration of 15 years, it is a pretty new topic for Germany, as the first project dropped out of EEG support on January 1st, and this will apply to a capacity of 16 gigawatts until 2025. While the European Commission's targets for the reduction of CO2 emissions have been augmented recently, which will largely have to be achieved by the development of renewable energy capacities, the question is, of course, what to do with these older capacities, often situated in sites with a very interesting climatic resource. At least as a temporary solution, the operation with a corporate PPA appears the most obvious solution until repowering can take place. This is terra incognita for most of us, but some do know more about this context already, and I am delighted that we have two of these experts with us today, Amandine Vollard from the French Agency for the Ecological Transition, ADEME, and Kai Höppner from BayWa.RE, who will share their analysis for France and Germany in a minute. Good morning to you. We are very much looking forward to hear what you have to say. Before I'll pass over to you, I have some technical announcements to make. We are aware of the fact that this issue is a vast and also to some extent a dialectic one, and that our audience might have quite a few questions for our speakers. You can submit them via the question function in the webinar cockpit. We will do our best to keep at least 20 minutes for a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. But that might not be enough to answer all of them. I'd like to apologize for this eventuality straight away. However, our speakers agreed that we forward all unanswered questions after the end of the webinar in order to get in touch with you directly. Also, the slides of the presentations will soon be available on our website, and you will also be able to access the video recording by connecting to the members section. A big thank you to ADEME and BayWa.RE for agreeing to this. All participants shall receive a mail notifying them once the files are up. If you should experience difficulties with the sound or the image, my advice for you would be to shut down the webinar plugin and to relaunch it by clicking the link in the notification mail you received this morning. One last thing before we start. At the end of the webinar, you will be asked to participate in a quick questionnaire, which consists of just 5 questions. You can skip that, of course, but if you participate, you will help us to improve our formats. And that's all from my side for now. Let's get started. Amandine and Kai, please take over. Have a great webinar, everyone.
Thank you very much, Sven, for this introduction. My name is Amandine Vollard. As introduced by Sven, I'm from ADEME, the French Ecological Transition Agency, and I work at the Networks and Renewable Energies Department as a wind and marine renewable energies engineer. Thank you very much to the French German Office for Energy Transition for having us today to speak on this very important theme of the energy transition. I will speak to you about a study that we performed in 2019 on repowering and on the strategies for French wind farms related to challenges on this topic. So we, ADEME, led this study and we funded it, and it was performed by 3 consultancies, Everose, Inosi, and ABS. First, a few words on the context, the objectives, and the scope of the study. As most of you probably know already, France has a plan which is called the French Energy Plan, or PPE, which gives objectives towards 2023 and 2028 for the development of renewable energies. And concerning offshore wind farm capacity, the objective is to switch from 17 gigawatts today to 34 gigawatts in 2028. So that's from around 8,000 turbines today to around 14,000 turbines by then. So the goal is quite ambitious, and it has to be put in perspective with the fact that more than 7 gigawatts of onshore wind farms will reach the end of their feed-in tariff contracts by 2028. As mentioned by Sven already, in France, before 2016, the feed-in tariff contract was of 15 years. So for the wind farms that were installed in the years 2010-ish, the contracts will soon reach their end or have already had. In parallel to that, there is, as you may know as well, rising opposition in some areas of France. So that's not everywhere, unfortunately, but some areas are already quite concerned with the development of onshore wind farms. There is already high installed capacity in the north and in the east of France, for instance, and we are reaching a saturation point in terms of perception of the population from a landscape and land use point of view. So the overall goal is to try and optimize this land use when possible. So in that context, the main objective of the study was to determine to what extent can repowering contribute to reaching the energy plan objectives. And a few other objectives were to conduct a European benchmark on repowering. I won't spend much time on that, unfortunately, because we don't have time, but the main conclusion that we draw from the study, without spoiling the rest, is that overall in Europe, the situation is quite uneven. Repowering has just started. The only country back in 2019 where repowering was encouraged was Portugal, with simplified procedures and a dedicated tariff. And overall, repowering could lead to a reduction of the number of turbines of about 30%. So that would be a good sign for the objective that we have in France to try and optimize the land use. So what I will show you in more details is the available options for wind farm managers, as well as the technical, economic, and environmental consequences of each type of repowering. And finally, before getting into it, a few words on the scope and the context. I'm trying to change the slide. Yes, thank you. I don't know if it's me or if it's OFATE, so thank you in case. We considered in the study only the turbines that were commissioned before 2015. So that's about 742 turbines, around 5,600 machines. 742 wind farms and around 5,600 machines. 9.2 gigawatts of installed capacity. So the length of the study was 11 months, and the steering committee was made of course, ADEME, Everose, Inosi, and ABS, and the French Energy Regulatory Commission, 2 departments of the Ministry for the Ecological Transition, as well as 2 trade associations for wind power and renewable energy. Just a word on the scope and on the turbines that were considered. We managed for this study to have a data set that was provided by a partner of us, which is LPO, la Ligue de Protection des Oiseaux, so the protection lead for birds. Who actually a couple of months ago did this data set of wind turbines for another specific study. So we had an NDA to be able to use this data set for the purpose of the study. So for some reason, yeah, thank you very much. I will maybe ask to change the slide because it doesn't work from my side. So now we are getting into it. We considered 4 main types of repowering for the purpose of the study. You can see on this slide the different types in a decreasing order of conflict intensity. First of all, of course, there is the impossible, well, the case when repowering is impossible, when there are too many or too large critical constraints. That's, for instance, the case when you have houses in a perimeter of 500 meters of the wind turbines, or when there is a specific regulation, such as coastal regulation. So I have to mention here that the regulation in France appeared gradually in the year 2010. So before 2011, actually, we didn't have that rule of having turbines further than 500 meters from the houses. So there can be a significant number of turbines that could be concerned by this rule. That doesn't mean that the whole wind farm cannot be repowered, but at least some of the turbines can be concerned. Then we have the quasi-identical and limited height types. Quasi-identical means that the total height cannot be changed, but you can have a change in an increase in the rotor diameter. And limited height considers a global limit of 150 meters height for the turbines. For those two kinds, it would mainly be aeronautic constraints or radar constraints that would have an impact, and that would necessitate to reduce the total height of the repowered wind farm. And finally, the uncapped option, which is basically the no limit type of repowering, where we can have the latest available technologies. If you can please change the slide. Then we go to the constraints. What are them? First of all, we considered 5 main types of constraints. The two first one, radar and aeronautic, are the two ones that impact the most of the wind farms. Then we have Natura 2000, which is, as you probably know, the network of protected areas for birds and habitats in Europe. Other environmental regulations and landscape. So, for instance, protected building and UNESCO constraints. On the right-hand side, you can see a map of the number of constraints per region in France. And you can see here that's quite uneven. If you go, for instance, in Brittany, so in the northwest of France, most of the wind farms will not be impacted or very slightly, while in the southeast, most of the wind farms will be impacted by 2, 3, or 4 constraints. Overall, over the whole wind farms that were commissioned before 2015, 65% are affected by at least one constraint. And of course, the oldest wind farms are the most affected ones. This means, in consequence, that some wind farms could be dismantled because of an accumulation of constraints. And that's independently of the circular of the 11 July 2018. Some of you may not know this circular, so just a word on that. We don't have a specific regulation yet applying to repowering, indicating what kind of authorization will be necessary. Only this circular actually gives indication to the prefects, who will in the end make the decision. And there is a bit, it's actually a bit blurry still for the wind managers, because this circular actually gives indication on what can be a significant change or a substantial change. If you are going for a significant change only, then you won't need to go through the whole authorization process again for your repowering. But if you go for a substantial modification, then you will need to go again for the whole authorization process, which of course is longer and more expensive. But the terms of what's significant and what's substantial change are not completely defined. For instance, we know that if there is a total increase of the height of the wind farm of less than 10%, then it should be considered as only a significant change. If it's more than 50%, then it should be a substantial change. But if it's in between, then it's going to be case by case. Sorry. So there's a bit of a blurry line here that needs to be defined in a more solid regulation, but I will come back on that. So yes, overall, this risk of dismantling concerns around 10% of the studied wind farm. Next slide, please. Thank you. I won't go through whole of this slide. I just wanted to show you the categories that we considered for the wind farms that were studied. So 8 of them for the different size of turbines, types of turbines, and the constraints that apply. It can be refined into 3 main groups. Before 2005, where you have high impact of 2 to 3 constraints. 2005 to 2009, where there is no major constraint or on most projects, or only one height constraint. So this would mean that in this type, in this big category, you would mainly have quasi-identical or limited height repowerings. I should mention that in the study, we didn't consider the classified installation for, actually, no, sorry. It's not that we didn't consider the classified installation for the protection of the environment. It's rather than we didn't consider the limited distance to housing. So it means that in this category of 2005 to 2009, there could be some wind farms affected by also the proximity of houses. That was not considered. So it could have an impact as well that has not been quantified. And finally, the big category between 2010 and 2014, in this category, so this is the most recent wind farms, of course, and in this category, we would have mainly uncapped repowerings or limited height repowerings. Yes, you can maybe have a look at the details a bit later, because there is quite a lot of information on this slide, but we can go on. Thank you. So we talked about the different types of repowering, but another possibility when we reach the end of the feed-in tariff contract is to extend the life of the wind farm. So here we try to quantify how much this would cost and if it was viable for the managers of the wind farms. Basically, the main figure that you can see here, so the big graph, is the OPEX, for all categories of farms. So remember 1 to 8 that we saw just before, after the end of the feed-in tariff contract term. So on the horizontal axis, you have the OPEX in euros per megawatt hour, and on the vertical axis, you have the share of operating capabilities under the cost threshold. The orange block is the OPEX for year 16, dark green OPEX for year 20, and light green OPEX for year 25. The main conclusion that we can draw here is that after the end of the feed-in tariff contract terms, the OPEX should remain below 40 euros per megawatt hour, as you can see here, around 95% of the capacities should remain below that threshold for all years of the OPEX. If we go on the small graph now, this is only for categories 1 and 2, so the oldest wind farms. And here is quite different. Actually, for year 16, actually the dynamic is quite the same. But after that, for year 20 and 25, it gets more tricky and more expensive. So for these categories, only 50% of the capabilities should remain below 47 euros per megawatt hour until 25 years of operation. But still, overall, it can be an interesting possibility to extend the life of the wind farm from an economical point of view for most of the wind farms, maybe excluding the oldest ones. And next slide, please. On the next slide, we study the cost of repowering. So again, in euros per megawatt hour in cost of 2020. So same kind of graph you have in the axis, the repowering cost in euros per megawatt hour, and in the vertical axis, the share of operating capabilities and the cost threshold. In light green is the uncapped repowerings. So you can see that it's the most interesting option for the wind farms when it's possible, because the cost shall remain below 50 euros per megawatt hour for almost all of the capacities. And then it becomes less interesting for limited height and even less interesting for quasi-identical. LCOE of quasi-identical repowered wind farms shall remain below 70 euros per megawatt hour for around 75% of them. Finally, identical repowering could be prohibitive for 10 to 20% of installed capacity, meaning that it should reach 70 to 75 euros per megawatt hour. And yes, next slide, please. So this is only a qualitative approach that we have here. Another goal of this study, apart from drawing the options for the wind managers, was also to study, of course, the economic impact of each options, but also the environmental impacts. It's not a quantitative, it's only, again, a qualitative approach on three main environmental impacts of wind farms: noise, landscape management, and impacts on biodiversity, and most especially bats and birds. Considering uncapped repowerings, which is the optimal, we would have less turbines, which are the most recent technologies, which perform better. So in the end, you should have less noise on the same wind farm as compared to the one before. Again, on the landscape, the impact should be rather limited or positive, because you should have higher but less turbines. So I know this can be also case by case, because sometimes you can, it can be better to have less turbines, but sometimes when you have more, depending on the topography of the area, it can be annoying. But the objective of the repowering is also to remove the most impacting turbines. So in that perspective, we consider that the impact on landscape is rather limited or positive. And finally, the impact on biodiversity. Here again, it's the number that is more important than the height of the turbine. So the impact on territory loss should be actually quite neutral, and the impact on death should be lower, because again, fewer turbines and removal of the most impacted ones. Finally, regarding the life cycle assessment, since most of the impacts are located on the fabrication phase of the wind turbines, the fact that lifespan can be increased is actually a very important point. And of course, as well, the improvement of turbines reliability is one of the, well, those two factors should improve the main indicators of the LCAs. So overall, it's rather a positive impact of repowering. Of course, when all things are evenly considered and thoroughly done. I think I have just one more slide before my conclusion. Thank you. This basically gives you the overall analysis of the gain in production and in capacity. So in the lines are the cumulative data, and the bars are the annual data. So overall, the gains of capacity and production linked to repowering are of about 1.5 gigawatts and of 10 terawatt hour per year. This should be compared to the initial 9.2 gigawatts and 20 terawatt hour per year. What we can see here, and what's quite interesting, is that the objective would be rather to increase the production than the installed capacity. So the efficiency of the installed wind farm can really be increased. However, in 2030 and beyond, and if, of course, the lifespan of the farms is extended to 25 years, the first dismantling could reduce these gains that I just mentioned of 0.7 or 1 gigawatts and around 2 terawatt hour per year. So this is still an interesting lever, and I will skip to the conclusion now to give the room to my colleague from Germany. First of all, before getting to repowering, it's interesting to see that wind farms can be operated for 25 years with OPEX comprised in majority between 20 and 30 euros per megawatt hour in the years 15 to 25, during which there is no feed-in tariff. Then regarding repowering, 25 to 40% of repowering capacities would be quasi-identical, which will have an impact on the LCOE of the wind farm, and which may not be as interesting as other types of repowering. That's my other dot, because these types of repowering should be 15 to 20 euros per megawatt hour more expensive. And finally, there is a risk of permanent dismantling for around 10% of the studied wind farms. So the perspectives for us are to try and encourage uncapped repowering when that's possible, because they are the significant lever to reach the French energy plan objectives. There is a need for a clarification of the regulatory framework, namely the 11 July 2018 circular. And finally, the constraints should be lightened when it's possible in order to encourage and facilitate repowering, especially the uncapped one. So that's work that is now ongoing at a national level, especially for the aeronautical constraints, which are some of the most important ones. So I did not give a specific example of France, because finally the repowering has just started in France, but it gives good perspectives. And maybe one last word on that. Some wind farms have already been dismantled as well in France, especially one of them was quite advertised in 2019. It was in Port-la-Nouvelle with a recycling rate which was quite important, which also gives good opportunities for the future of the sector, and for the next year to come, which might be quite challenging with this repowering to come. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have questions, I will take them at the end of the presentation or by email. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amandine, for this very interesting presentation on the situation in France. And we will continue with Kai Höppner from BayWa RE with a presentation on the situation in Germany. And as Amandine just said, please do ask your questions via the questions function in your module. And we will have a Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. Kai, please take over.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, Sven. So welcome to the webinar from me as well. My name is Kai Höppner. I am at the BayWa RE since 2015, responsible for the new business, including the topic of continued operation. So I try to get to skip. Okay, I also can't move this. Yeah, thank you. So a short look at the agenda. After the introduction to the topic, we go to a case study of an economical continued operation, and we'll end up with the outlook of the EEG 2021. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The initial situation, as mentioned from Sven in Germany, is that in total 16 gigawatt of wind energy capacity will run out of the feed-in tariff by the end of 25. So a big part is running out at the end of 2020. So that leads to the question, next slide, please. To the question, what happens to your wind farm after the end of the feed-in tariff of the EEG support? So basically, there are 4 options of action. So continued operation, repowering, dismantling, and sale. With continued operation, there is an opportunity to generate income and cash in the future, yes, but there are also some risks. So normally, you have to expect lower revenues, and the technical failures of the wind turbines will tend to increase. So later in the webinar, we will go to this point in detail with the case study. Next slide, please. So repowering, of course, is the best action, and the precondition for this is that the planning law exists, as mentioned from in the first part of the webinar. So there are a lot of challenges to deal with. So, for example, in a big wind farm area, there are different operators where each of them has its own idea about the right time and the type of repowering. You have to explain the landowners the change project layouts for the new wind farm, and which normally leads to a new distribution of leases. And I think everybody knows in detail about the expanded permit procedures and the increased requirements, even under the nature conservation law. So to shorten, just let me mention that you should plan a long lead time for the project development, about 3 to 5 years. And to bridge these planning period, you can perfectly do a continued operation of the existing wind turbines, so to get some more income. Next slide, please. Yeah, let's have a short look on the topic of dismantling. Many operators think that the dismantling of a turbine is a no-brainer. Our experience shows 2 things. In first part, the dismantling is a complex topic with many interfaces and many influencing factors, which often takes more time than expected. And second, dismantling is more expensive than it was thought in the beginning of the project development or in the beginning of the project. So, for example, here we have a GE 1.5. The dismantling cost is about 120,000 euros. So important to see is that the part of the foundation and infrastructure will take about 40% of the total cost of dismantling. So our advice, please get current offers of different suppliers and check if you have enough savings for dismantling. Next slide, please. One further action can be the sale of the wind farm. If you think the risks of continued operation are too high or the effort required to organize this is too much, you have the possibility to sell your wind farm. For this purpose, we have founded a special company, the BayWa RE Wind 20 Plus GmbH. We can provide almost all services internally and cost effectively, so that we think we can give you a good price on your wind farm. And yeah, just ask us if you have interest in this point. Next slide, please. So let us now turn to the topic of operating concepts for economical continued operation. I would like to demonstrate this with a case study. Next slide, please. So we have wind farm in North Rhine-Westphalia with 9 Nordex and 60. So the commissioning was in March 2000. So the end of the EEG tariff is the end of December in 2020. It is operated by a closed-end fund, which gives the following continuing operation strategy. So they wanted to make a continued operation for as long as possible, but in securing the dismantling cost in current offers and to secure the liquidation cost of the company. Next slide, please. In order to implement an economical continued operation in a structured manner, we have developed a checklist you see here so for ourselves. On the left side of the template, you see the EEG phase, in which basically everything is regulated and fixed until the end of the EEG subsidy. But then the question is, what will happen after the 20th year of operation, and what steps are necessary for an economical continued operation? We will now go through these 6 points by the checklist step by step, using the case study, and then we can see if it's possible to have an operating wind farm which is economical. Next slide, please. So the first step is the analysis and assessment of existing contracts. The first thing we have to check is if the preconditions are given. So it is very important that the land and the grid connection are secured, as you see here. So the turbine locations are secured until the end of 25, and the road and cables until 29. And the shared substation, so the grid connection is secured until 2030. So the preconditions for continued operation are given here. The other project contracts are well aligned, so the most of them will end at the end of 2020. So that is very nice, because we have then no restrictions to choose operational concept, and can then conclude with a chosen concept, conclude new contracts to optimize the OPEX. Next slide, please. The second step concerns the issue of permit. So the precondition for a legally compliant operation of the wind turbine is a valid operating permit. The permit often refers to the type testing, and there it is stated that's about operating a lifetime, so about 20 years. So in this case, the end of permit is March of 2020, even if the EEG subsidy will be in place until the end of 2020. So to solve this problem, you need an expert opinion, the so-called continued operation report, and you have it in place at least in March 2020. Our approach, as you see, we started with this expert opinion nearly 1 year before the end of the permit. So it is due to a shortage of experts and possibly weather-related delays of the practical inspections, and also delays of the analytical method due to incomplete data or documents, because you have to set up a really huge package of data, and you have to put them together and give it to the expert. So that will take also some time. Next slide, please. So the first 2 steps we have worked through. So you see the rights of use are secured for 25 years, and the permit extension after getting the expert opinion is for 9 years and 2 months. So we can go to the point 3 and 4. Next slide, please. So what will be the impact of the different maintenance concepts on power production and on OPEX? So we built up 3 possible operating concepts in this case study. The concept 1 is like continues the concept from the EEG period. So it's a full maintenance contract with availability guarantee. So as you see, the impact on power production is that we assume that all the 9 wind turbines will operate over all time with a accordingly availability guarantee. So high power production that leads to high maintenance cost and to low repair and insurance costs. So the operating concept 2, there is a basic maintenance contract and additional ongoing repairs in regard to the potential power production. There will be some breakdowns and decommissionings during the period of continued operation, as you see in the table, and the availability and the number of wind turbines will reduce over the time. So the lower the production will be lower than the variant 1. At the OPEX, this means the maintenance costs are lower than the full maintenance contract. However, the cost for repairs and insurance costs also increase accordingly. So, but the idea behind this concept 2 is to activate an asset management to optimize the power production and make the cost side much more flexible, with the freedom to decide whether and which repairs are carried out. At least the operating concept 3, so that is a low budget or zero budget basic maintenance contract, and repairs are reduced to a minimum. So the assumption is that the lack of technical maintenance, so the turbines will more often fail with major damage and will then no longer be repaired. So the turbines are basically driven to full wear and tear. So at the OPEX, that means that there are minimal maintenance as well as repair and insurance costs, and to the potential power production that has a negative impact on the availability and the number of the wind turbines in operation, as you see that there are only 2 operating turbines in the end of 25. In the case of number 2 and 3, the old turbines can serve as a spare part donors for the other operating wind turbines. So next slide, please. Thus, we have ticked off points 3 and 4 with the optimization of the OPEX and the forecast of the power production, depending on the different operating concepts. Next step, we look at the points 5 and 6. Next slide, please. This is about how the power sales concept can be. So some theoretics, there are 3 different models we can use for the power sales concepts. So the first one is the fixed price, and there the reference is the future markets on the EX power exchange. So in that case, you get a fixed price for the agreed delivery period, for example, 1 calendar year, the calendar year 2021. Which does not change for that period. So second opportunity is a monthly market value. So you know that from the classical direct marketing in the moment in Germany. So it's the monthly market value from the website netztransparenz.de less the marketing fee. And the third option is spot price. So there the reference is the published hourly auction on the EPEX spot price in Paris, and there you get the revenues resulting from the hourly measured feed-in production multiplied by the hourly spot prices and minus the service fee. Next slide, please. Back to the case study, where we have to decide of one of the 3 sales concept. we decided for the PPA fixed price model and received the offer presented here on the 26th of October in 2020. So that is including the different operational concepts. So the prices differ a little bit. So as you can see, the power purchase price is very low at the time due to the Corona crisis, but we had to fix for this wind farm. We did it, but only for the delivery year 2021. So in this year, the prices have recovered so that there will be a good chance to get a power purchase price for 2022 of, we assume, over 4 cents per kilowatt hour. Next slide, please. So with this fixed prices of the PPA, we can look on the impact of the power revenues and the cash flows. So with the operating concept 1, we see that the power revenues do not cover the operating costs, and that clearly leads to a negative cash flows which is generated from the continued operation. So in other words, the liquidity reserves of the past are being used up in the continuing operation. Next slide, please. So at the operating concept 2, the picture looks much better. At the end of 2021, we assume a gearbox damage in our model, so which will be repaired in 2022 and compensated by the insurance company in 2023. So according to their conditions. So you see a negative cash flow in 2022 and a higher cash flow in 2023. So as mentioned in the beginning, there's an active asset management to optimize the power revenues, which leads to slightly higher fees in the commercial and operational management. So down you see the dismantling cost reserve and the liquidation cost reserve. We built up these reserves from the 2020 liquidity reserve. So because the cost of the actual or of the current dismantling are higher than expected. So please make sure that not too much is paid out to the shareholders in the last year before the end of EEG feed-in tariff, so that you can build up these reserves. Next slide, please. So at the operating concept 3, so you see in particular to the first 2-3 years of continued operation, there are high cash flows, almost about 150,000 euros can be generated. So the only problem is that we cannot simply stop operation in the end of 23 at no cost, because the lease agreements, they have a fixed term until 25. So with a fixed cost per year. So in this case, the consequence of further wind turbines which decommission has the consequence that the power revenues will fall and that the cash flow will be negative in the last 2 years. So, but finally, even here in this case, in the operating concept 3, there is a cash flow surplus of around 75,000 euros. So next slide, please. Last but not least, we come to the decision-making process for one of the operating concepts. In the graph on the left side, you see the power revenues in cent per kilowatt hours and the specific OPEX summarized. On the right table, you see the most important influencing factors are shown again, which we have discussed in detail. So it's something like a cockpit for decision making. And in terms of the continued operation strategy of the fund, we decided for the operating concept 2 because it fits best to the strategy of the fund and has a balanced opportunity risk profile, and we have a good opportunity flexibility to operate the turbines after the 25th year of operation if necessary. So as you see, there are a large number of variants to set up and continue operation. You have to decide which kind of operational concept you choose, even, or you have to combine one or two of these operational concepts. So that is the effort you have to do to set up continued operation. Next slide, please. So have a last look at the checklist, and we can see we have now ticked off all the points of the checklist, and we can start with the implementation of economic continued operation. Thus, we end the case study and come to the outlook. Thank you. So the outlook is about the Renewable Energy Act, so the EEG 2021. So just short, we have here 2 points. We have a feed-in tariff for desubsidized wind turbines. The basis is the annual market value for the onshore wind energy from the Netz Transparenz webpage, and plus a bonus of production power from the year 21, and a malus of the marketing cost to transmission system operators. So for reference, you see in 2019, this market value was about 2.4 cents per kilowatt hour. So I don't know how it will be in this year. We will see how it will develop. And the second part is you can possibly participate in different tenders. There, the value of the bid will be between 3 and 3.8 cents per kilowatt hour. And then if you have this tender bid, the duration of entitlement will be until the end of 2022. But be aware, the approval by the European Commission under state aid law is not yet granted. So yeah, that is the last part of my webinar. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope we will have some short time for some questions.
Thank you very much, Kai Höppner, for your presentation, which contains a lot of interesting elements, I find, and in combination with Amandin's gives us quite a good picture of the situation for wind farms at the end of the support as we face it today in France and Germany. Maybe one question more or less to give us an idea of how to compare your findings. How would you assess the impact of 5 more years of operations at the end of the EEG support in Germany in comparison to the French case? How does that affect the cash flow of the project in the end? We saw that you were talking about gearbox failure, etc. That might be less likely to happen after 15 years, maybe. Kai.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. So it's so as the type testing is normally for 20 years. So I think the failures of the wind turbines will be more, or there will be more failures after 20 or 22 or 23 years. So if you go to a basic maintenance model, you have to really check and to model something like these large components failures, and then you have to deal with that to be flexible in the operational concept. So I think, yeah, I think after 15 years, okay, there can be some damages, okay, but normally 20 years is not a problem for a wind turbine. So
Okay. Maybe a question for both of you. In 2016, Deutsche Windgard said that in Germany only 20% of wind farms could be operated with profit after the end of support. In the meantime, we saw in Germany that it was complicated to build new wind farms with the tenders, for example. We also saw some volatility in the spot price this year. How would you assess that today? We saw in Amandin's presentation also an assessment on the probability of being profitable for let's say a certain time at least. Would you say that 20% is realistic, or maybe more that this value has risen in the meantime, considering the alternatives? Maybe Amandine first.
So from the French perspective, but this concerns the French wind farms and the cases that were studied in our case before 2015. Yes, there is a change in this number. We now consider that the majority of the wind farms shall be viable between the year 15 and 25 after the end of the feed-in contract term. But again, that's a French case. I wouldn't be able to identify exactly what has changed in the meantime to allow that. Maybe more efficiency, of course, a decrease in the global costs as the sector has also rise in Europe. But maybe Kai wants to complete that point.
Yes, I agree completely. It is like, so on the one hand, we see some development of the power purchase prices on the one hand. So in the moment, if the prices go up a little bit, so but for the maintenance cost, there are different, let's say, third-party suppliers which offers these maintenance at lower cost. As you said, Amandi, it's like they all know, okay, everybody has to earn a little bit less, so but we earn something. So that is the idea. It's easy to negotiate new contracts with new service providers and insurance and so on. Where we have some problems, or the topic is with the landowners. So they want to have not everybody, but some older ones, or some which get used to the money. So they say, okay, I want to have the money as in the years before, and if you don't want to pay that, so then you can dismantle. So so often there's not the idea of earn a little bit less. So, but yeah, you have to check it.
Okay. Thank you. The next question is also for Kai Höppner concerning his concept V2 and the compatibility of this concept with repowering. Of course, I mean, if we talk about repowering, we don't imagine that the turbines will be built on the same spots as the existing wind turbines. But how would you say does this affect your business model? We understand from both presentations that the operation after the end of support is more like a bridge solution until repowering has been completed in most cases. Are there special challenges concerning the coexistence of the existing park and the one that is built?
No, not really, because it's Normally, if you have a wind farm area, so with the new turbines, it is like you have a new park layout. So in fact, normally you don't have the same locations of the wind turbine from the new and from the existing wind farm. So this is you can make the planning, and you can start with the permit procedure, and so normally it's like you have to dismantle, or in Germany, I think it's the most thing that you have to dismantle the existing wind turbines before build up the new turbines. So it is you can, as said, you can bridge this period, this planned period. You can bridge with some income and with some cash flows, and then you have to just make a switch from the existing wind farm to the new wind farm.
Okay, and as we are talking about repowering, maybe one question for Amandine. You mentioned that Portugal has chosen quite an efficient way to approach towards repowering. Could you give us some hints about what is different there in comparison to France, or maybe if you know the case in Germany?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I got the question.
You mentioned that Portugal has
Yes.
an effective approach towards repowering. What's different in Portugal in comparison to France?
So I don't know if it's efficient, but at least it exists, which is the main difference with actually France and Germany. So Portugal has a mechanism where the repowering is financed at, I think, 45 euros per megawatt hour, with simplified procedures to be able to access the authorizations and build the new wind farm. And so back in 2019, but I don't think it has changed. It was the only country that had a specific process for repowerings. And in other countries, it's undergoing, it's being built, but so I don't know exactly about Germany, but for France, as I mentioned, for now, there is only a so-called circular to the prefects that gives indications on what to consider being substantial and significant change. But it does not have the value of a law, so it's still subject to interpretation, and there is no incitation, there is no support apart, of course, from the new support that you can ask for if you develop a new wind farm. So once you have repowered your wind farm, then you can compete again to get a feed-in tariff. Well, actually now it's a new scheme of support, but that's how it's different mainly.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe for our listeners, we also have scheduled a conference on operating wind farms after the support and repowering this spring. I will tell you more about this in a second. But before we come to that, one last question to both of you, excuse me. Kai mentioned, excuse me, on his last slide, the possibility to participate for these wind farms with the EEG 2021 in new concepts like a balancing energy. How likely do you assess this to be, that those old parks that quite often are maybe not equipped with a remote control will be able to participate in this market?
Okay, yeah. If they don't have a remote control, something like that, so it's very difficult, because the off-taker, they need, or by law, they need a remote control. So if you don't get, or if you don't have that one, you just perhaps can make a PPA with an industrial supplier or off-taker. So that is a possibility. But if you go to the, let's say you are still at the end or after the EEG subsidy, you are still a EEG turbine. So, and then if the off-taker has to manage and has to propose his energy which he gives in the market, so he needs to be aware that he can have remote control access. So yeah, if you don't have that, it's a little bit difficult, I think.
Then you would consider that installing a remote control at that stage would not be a good idea in terms of the liquidity of your project, I imagine.
Yeah, you have to discuss, I think, with the off-taker. So sometimes there are some not that expensive solutions for this one, but yeah, please contact the different off-takers and discuss with them, or the service providers. So there are different suppliers which can do not a too complicated solution, and that is not too expensive.
Okay, Amandine, do you know, or how would you assess this situation in France? Do you think that the parks we're talking about that are older than 15 years would be fit for a participation in balancing energy markets?
To be fairly honest, I don't know for France. I wouldn't know how to answer this question.
Okay, but we saw that in Germany, a lot of old parks were equipped with remote controls after 2012, when direct marketing was also applied to parks that were already running. And in France, there never has been this switchback possibility. So maybe the percentage of parks equipped with remote controls is less big. Thank you very much. Excuse me for my voice. We are already coming to the end of this webinar. Thank you ever so much, Amandine Vollard and Kai Höppner, for your interesting presentations and the Q&A session. Big thanks also to Stephanie from our team for the coordination during the preparation, and Celine for the technical support behind the scene today. Before we sign off, just a few announcements. You were 130 today to follow us, and you will all be able to download the slides from our website in a few days. And we will also upload the video recording of this webinar in the members section of our website, so you will be able to access all of that in a few days, and you will receive a mail notifying you once this is available. Coming up next at the Franco-German office, we have on January 26th a webinar on renewable heat in France and Germany. On February 11th, a conference on the digitization and energy transition, solutions and business models. And then, as I mentioned before, very close to today's topic, on March 2nd and 3rd, we will take a deeper look into today's topic with a conference on wind parks at the end of support, and also about repowering. So you can extend your knowledge at that occasion. You can register for all of our conferences and webinars on OFATE.eu for the French speakers and DFBEW for our German speakers. And on our website, you will, as I said, also find today's slides and many interesting publications on this topic and many others for you to download. And also, while you're there, don't forget to consult our annual program for 2021. We are currently preparing a new series of webinars on a large variety of topics, so please do make sure that you are on our mailing lists and stay updated by that means. And this is all from my side for now. Thank you very much for being with us today, and please do stay safe See you very soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye.